I never thought my life would break in front of so many people. It was my daughter's school award ceremony, and I stood in the last row, holding flowers for her. When her name was called, she ran past me straight into another woman's arms, my wife's new partner, the woman she now called Mom. My son followed her, holding her hand like I did not exist. My wife smiled at me from the stage and said in front of everyone, "We are happier now." I felt my chest burn, but I forced myself to smile. I clapped for my children while they chose a new mother. That day, I realized my family had already left me long before this moment. I just hadn't accepted it yet. I walked toward the stage, my hands shaking as I held the flowers a little tighter. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She didn't even look surprised. "Not now." I swallowed hard. "Just 5 minutes." She sighed. "You're making a scene." I laughed, but it came out broken. "A scene?" I'm watching my children walk away from me. My daughter finally noticed me. "Dad," she said softly, but didn't move. I stepped closer. "Come here, sweetheart." She replied, "I can't." Mom said I should stay here. I felt something crack inside me. "Mom," I repeated. She nodded toward the woman beside my wife. "She's my mom now." My throat tightened. I looked at my son. "And you?" He avoided my eyes. "I like her. She takes care of us." I stepped back like the ground had disappeared. Wife walked closer and whispered, "Don't make this harder than it is." I stared at her. "You already replaced me." She didn't deny it. Behind me, I could hear people whispering, but I couldn't understand their words anymore. I forced a smile again because my legs wouldn't move. I said quietly, "So this is it?" She answered, "This is better for everyone." I nodded slowly. "Even for me?" She didn't respond. I turned to my children again, my voice breaking. "Do you remember who used to tuck you in every night?" "Mom does that now." I felt my eyes burn, but I refused to cry. I said, "All right, I understand." I placed the flowers on the empty step beside me. They didn't even look at them. I laughed softly. Funny, I was the one who used to stand in every crowd cheering for them. And now I'm the one no one is looking at. I stepped back from the stage slowly. "I won't fight anymore," I said. My wife looked at me sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done waiting," I replied. I turned away from them before my voice could break again. I could hear my son call softly, "Dad," but I didn't turn back. I kept walking until the applause faded behind me. I whispered to myself, "So this is what being erased feels like." I stopped at the gate when someone behind me spoke. "You're not leaving like this, are you?" I recognized her voice. It was my wife. I turned slightly. "What else is there left for me here?" She hesitated. "We can fix this." I almost laughed. "Fix it? You already replaced me in front of them." My daughter shouted from the stage, "Mom, come here." I felt that word hit me harder than anything else. I said quietly, "She already chose." I walked out into the sunlight, my chest feeling empty. I heard footsteps behind me again, faster this time. "Wait," she called out. I didn't stop walking. I said, "I stayed long enough to be forgotten." The wind felt colder as I reached the road outside the school. I finally let the smile I had been holding collapse. I whispered, "They didn't walk away today, they walked away long ago." I stood there for a moment, watching the school gates behind me. I knew this was not just a goodbye. It was the moment I stopped being their father in their eyes. I turned away for the last time. I walked forward, not knowing what comes next, but knowing I cannot return back. I came back home alone after the ceremony, and the house felt different, like it was pretending to still be mine. My wife, Sarah, arrived late, and she didn't even look at me. Sarah said, "You're still here?" I said, "This is my house, too." She replied, "Not emotionally, it isn't." My children walked past me like I was invisible, and that hurt more than anything Sarah ever said. I said, "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" My son said, "Mom says you talk too much." I asked, "Since when did I become a stranger in my own house?" I looked at Sarah and said, "They don't even see me anymore." Sarah said, "Because Daniel understands them better than you ever did." I felt my chest tighten, and I whispered, "I raised them." She replied, "Raising isn't the same as connecting." I sat on the sofa and realized I was no longer part of this family conversation. My son said, "Daniel said you should stop acting like the victim." I said, "I'm not acting. I'm losing you all." Sarah said, "We already decided what's best." I asked, When exactly did I stop being your husband in this house? No one answered me, and that silence felt louder than any insult. I walked into my room and closed the door, pretending I still belonged. I whispered, if this is my new reality, I need to survive it. I said, and if they don't need me, I will learn not to need them. I opened my laptop and started writing down everything they had said to me today. I said, maybe I need to stop waiting for them to choose me. I whispered, maybe I need to choose myself instead. Sarah knocked on the door and said, stop being dramatic. I replied, I'm not dramatic. I'm breaking. My son laughed from outside and said, Daniel said you always say that. I pressed my forehead against the wall and whispered, what did I become in this house? Sarah said, you became someone who couldn't keep us happy. I laughed quietly and said, we're someone you stopped appreciating. I stood up and said, I understand now. I really do. Sarah said, good. Then don't make this harder. I looked at the empty hallway and whispered, this is how I disappear. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, thinking this is not the end of my story, just the end of how they saw me. I didn't sleep that night, and every sound in the house reminded me I was invisible. Sarah said, you're still up? I said, I never really slept. She said, that's your problem. I poured water and said, so this is how it ends, quietly, without anyone noticing. Sarah said, stop overthinking everything. I said, I'm not overthinking. I'm finally seeing clearly. My son said, Daniel is taking us shopping today. I said, and I'm not invited? He said it's a family thing. I smiled painfully and said, right? Of course. I went back to my room and started packing a small bag, just in case I needed to leave soon. Sarah said, what are you doing? I said, preparing for what you already started. I paused and thought, maybe this is the moment everything breaks for real. Sarah said, you're being ridiculous. I looked at her and said, one day you will realize what you lost. My son said, we're not losing anything. I nodded slowly and said, not yet. I sat by the window, watching them laugh in the living room without me, and I finally understood something I didn't want to accept. I was already gone in their story, even while I was still standing in it. I whispered to myself that this wasn't my ending. It was the beginning of me learning how to live without being needed, and maybe one day they would understand what silence from a father really means. I did not look back again. 2 weeks later, Sarah placed the divorce papers on the table like they meant nothing. I said, what is this? Sarah said, you already know. I don't understand. Sarah said, it's time. My son said, just sign it. My daughter whispered, Mom said this is better. Sarah said, Daniel can give us a better future. I asked, and what did I give you all these years? She laughed softly, a life, but not enough stability. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. I said, so this is how I disappear from my own family. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I signed the papers. Sarah said, good. This makes it easier for everyone. I whispered, even for me? She didn't answer. The room felt colder than before. My son said, we don't need this drama. I said, drama? This is my life ending. Sarah said, you're overreacting again. I looked at her and said, I built everything you're standing on. My daughter said, Daniel says you should move on. I said, he is not part of this family. Sarah said, he is more part of it than you are now. Something inside me broke quietly. I stood up slowly. I said, then I guess I don't belong here anymore. Sarah said, that's your choice. I went to my room and packed a small bag. My friend Imran called and said, come to my place. I said, I don't have anything left here. He said, that's exactly why you should come. I looked around the house one last time. I whispered, everything I built gone. Sarah said, leave the keys. I placed them on the table and said, I hope you never realize what you lost too late. I walked out without turning back. That house didn't feel like mine anymore. My phone rang again. It was Imran. I answered, I'm coming. He said, good. You'll stay here as long as you need. I said nothing for a moment. I couldn't believe this was my life now. I heard Sarah in the background laughing with them. I whispered, so easily replaced. The street outside felt colder than anything inside. I stood there thinking about everything I lost. He said on call, don't look back now. I said I won't. I closed my eyes and remembered when they used to run toward me. I said, "What did I go wrong?" The answer didn't come. I realized maybe I didn't lose them today. I lost them slowly over years. I tightened my grip on the bag and started walking. I said softly, "This is the end of begging." He said, "You'll rebuild." I asked, "Do people like me even get rebuilt?" He replied, "They do when they stop staying where they're broken." I kept walking, even when my hands were shaking. I said, "I will not return as the man they discarded." The night air hit my face, and I felt strangely alive. I whispered, "If this is rebirth, then I accept it." I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I couldn't be the same man again. I said, "Sarah, Daniel, you took my family, but not my life." I stopped at the corner and looked back one last time. The house was gone from my sight, but not from my memory. I said, "This is where my old life ends." He called again, "Are you close?" I said, "Yes. I'm leaving the past behind." I walked forward into the night without looking back. I whispered, "This is my silence and my beginning." I didn't know who I would become, but I knew I would never beg again. I stepped into the unknown, feeling the weight of everything I lost, but also the strange strength of someone who finally stopped being chosen and started choosing himself. I was finally my own man now, and I never looked back. A week after the divorce, my phone rang while I was sitting in Imran's spare room, staring at nothing. I answered hello. A calm voice said, "Is this Mr. Zaman?" I replied, "Yes. Who is this?" He said, "This is Mr. Harris, legal counsel. I represent your late grandfather's estate." I sat up. "My grandfather? He passed away years ago." He said yes, but he left instructions that were only to be opened after your divorce was finalized. I frowned. "That makes no sense." He said, "It will when you come to my office." I paused. "Is this a joke?" He replied, "No, Mr. Zaman. This is very real." Something in his tone made me stand up immediately. "I'll come." When I arrived at his office, everything felt too clean, too quiet. Mr. Harris looked at me carefully. "You don't seem like a man who expects inheritance." I said, "I don't expect anything anymore." He nodded. "That may change today." He slid a thick file toward me. I said, "What is this?" He replied, "Ownership documents. Business transfer. Property rights." I frowned. "Just tell me what you mean." He leaned back. "Your grandfather owned a private logistics and supply company. You are now the sole heir." I blinked. "That's impossible." He said, "It's verified and legally binding." I opened the file slowly, my hands shaking. Page after page had my name. I whispered, "This has to be a mistake." He said it isn't. I looked up. "How much are we talking about?" He replied calmly, "More than you can easily calculate. And there is something else." I asked, "What else?" He hesitated. "One of the company's senior operational partners is currently managing key regional contracts." I said, "And?" He slid another document forward. I froze. "That name?" Mr. Harris said, "Yes. Daniel, your ex-wife's partner." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I whispered, "So he works under me?" He replied, "Legally, yes. You are now the ultimate owner." A strange silence filled the room. Then I laughed once. Not loud, not happy, just real. I said, "So while I was being replaced at home, I was already above him somewhere else." He said carefully, "Life has unusual timing." I leaned back in the chair. "I don't know what to feel." He said, "Don't feel anything yet. Understand first." When I left his office, the air outside felt different. I called him Ron. He picked up. "You sound weird. What happened?" I said, "You won't believe it." He asked, "Did Sarah call you again?" I said no. "Something bigger." He said, "Good or bad?" I paused. "I don't know yet." That night, I sat alone with the documents spread across the bed. I whispered, "All this time, I thought I was nothing." I flipped another page. My grandfather's signature stared back at me like a message from the past. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" There was no answer. My phone lit up with messages from my children. Still nothing. No replies from them to my texts. I opened our chat. "Me, I miss you." No response. "Me, I'm still your father." Seen. No reply. I closed the phone slowly. I whispered, "So even with everything I gave, I still mean nothing to them." The next morning, I met Mr. Harris again. He said, "Have you processed it?" I replied, "No, but I understand one thing." He asked, "What's that?" I said, "I'm no longer powerless." He nodded. "That is the first step." I leaned forward. "Tell me everything about the company." He said, "That's a very different tone from yesterday." I replied, "Yesterday I was a man who lost his family. Today I'm something else." He studied me. "What are you becoming?" I said quietly, "Someone who won't be erased again." Days passed differently after that. I started reading contracts, reports, structures I never understood before. Imran said, "You're changing." I said, "I don't have a choice." He replied, "You do. You're just finally choosing yourself." One evening, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. I said, "Sarah, you thought you broke me." I paused. "But you only ended one version of me." My phone rang again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I said, "Not everything deserves my attention anymore." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something steady inside me. Not happiness. Not revenge. Control. I closed the file and whispered, "Now let's see what happens when the man you discarded stops being nothing." I started working inside the company slowly, quietly, without telling anyone who I really was. To them, I was just another new consultant reviewing operations. To me, I was watching everything. Daniel walked through the office like he owned the air. He said, "These regional contracts are fine. No need to overthink them." I replied calmly, "You sure?" He looked at me like I was nothing. "Yeah, I've been handling this longer than you've been here." I nodded. "Interesting." He laughed. "You'll learn. Just don't slow me down." I said nothing, but inside, I already saw the cracks in his confidence. Every report he ignored, I noted. Every decision he rushed, I recorded. He had no idea the man he was dismissing was now connected to the system above him. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. I said, "Yes." Her voice was sharp, impatient. "I don't have time. Just listen." I replied, "Go ahead." She said, "Our son is in the hospital. High fever. They want a deposit before treatment continues." I asked, "Is he okay?" She said, "That's not the point. Can you send money or not?" Silence hit me harder than her words. I said quietly, "I'll come." She snapped, "No, just send it." Then the call ended. I stood still for a long time, phone in my hand. Then I whispered, "So, even in pain, I'm just a wallet." I went to the hospital anyway. The building smelled like antiseptic and fear. I saw my daughter sitting outside the room. She looked up and froze. For a second, she didn't move. Then she said softly, "Dad," like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. I walked closer. "Hey." She looked away immediately. "Mom said you're busy." I said, "I'm not." She hesitated. "Are you here for us?" I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure what she meant anymore. Sarah came out of the room, tired and irritated. She saw me and frowned. "I told you not to come." I replied, "Our son is inside." She said, "He's stable." I asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She shrugged. "Didn't think you'd care." That sentence didn't hurt like before. It just felt familiar. I said, "I paid the hospital bill." She blinked. "What?" I said again, "It's done." She stared at me for a moment. "You didn't have to." I replied, "I know." My son was asleep when I saw him through the glass. Small, pale, still breathing through machines. Something in my chest tightened. I whispered, "He's still mine, even if I'm not his father anymore." Sarah said behind me, "Don't make this emotional." I turned slightly. Too late. My daughter stood beside me, quiet. She asked, "Why did you come?" I said, "Because he's my son." She frowned. "But you're not part of us anymore." I looked at her carefully. "I'm still part of you," I said. She didn't answer. Not because she disagreed, because she didn't know what to believe anymore. I paid the remaining hospital balance at the counter. The clerk said, "Would you like to leave a name for record?" I said no. He nodded and processed it. No acknowledgement. No gratitude. Nothing attached to me. That felt strangely peaceful. When I walked out, Sarah followed me. She said, "Why are you really doing this?" I stopped. "What do you mean?" She said, "You don't care about us like you used to." I turned slowly. "You're right." Her eyes narrowed. "Then why help?" I said quietly, Because caring and belonging are not the same thing anymore. She didn't understand. She never did. That night, I returned to the company files. Daniel's reports were sloppy again. I marked another inconsistency. I whispered, "You don't even see the ground collapsing under you." My assistant said, "Sir." I replied, "Nothing. Continue." Later, Imran asked, "Did you see them?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And?" I paused. "They didn't reject me today," I said. "They just didn't know how to reach me anymore." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Not anger, not sadness. Something else now. Understanding. I said quietly, "They didn't hate me." A long silence followed. They were taught to forget me. And that was the moment I realized something deeper. They were not my enemies yet, but the world I was stepping into might make them become part of my next war. Inside the company, I started seeing things I was never meant to see. At first, it was small inconsistencies. A missing signature here, a delayed report there. But then the pattern became clear. Daniel wasn't just careless. He was stealing. I sat in the office and said quietly, "This is worse than I thought." My assistant looked up. "Sir," I replied, "Nothing. Keep sending me the full audit logs." He nodded and left. I leaned back and whispered, "So this is what arrogance looks like when it thinks no one is watching." But someone was watching now. Me. I collected everything slowly. No rush. No noise. Just evidence. Bank transfers. Fake vendor names. Inflated invoices. Each file felt like a piece of his future collapsing into my hands. I said softly, "We didn't even try to hide it properly." And that was the dangerous part. He thought he was untouchable. At home, things were starting to break differently. I didn't see it myself, but I heard it through reports and small leaks of information. Sarah and Daniel were arguing more often. Money problems were showing cracks in their perfect life. My daughter told me once during a short call, "Mom is always angry now." I asked, "Why are you telling me this?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I just thought you should know." Then she hung up. My son tried calling me too. I saw his name flash on the screen. I didn't pick up immediately. I just stared at it. I whispered, "Now you remember I exist?" The phone kept ringing until it stopped. I didn't call back. Not yet. Imran noticed the change in me. He said, "You're pulling away from them even when they're reaching out." I replied, "They're not reaching out. They're reacting." He frowned. "That's still something." I said no. Something would have been years ago. He sighed. "You're going too far into this." I looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just not running back anymore." That night, I reviewed Daniel's financial trail again. The numbers didn't lie. Every layer I peeled back revealed another mistake he thought no one would notice. I said, "You didn't just steal money. You stole trust from people who don't even realize it yet." I saved every file twice. Encrypted, backed up, secured. Not for revenge. For truth. That's what I kept telling myself. But truth has a way of feeling like something heavier. Something sharper. Something that cuts both ways. I stared at the screen and whispered, "This isn't about me anymore." And yet I knew it was. A few days later, Sarah called again. I answered this time. She said, "We need help." I asked, "What kind of help?" She replied, "Money issues. Daniel made some bad decisions." I stayed silent. She added quickly, "Don't start judging." I said calmly, "I didn't say anything." She hesitated. "We're struggling." I replied, "I see." Then she said something I didn't expect. "Can you just help us fix this?" I closed my eyes for a second and said, "No." A long silence followed. She asked, sharper now, "What do you mean, no?" I said, "I mean you chose your path." She snapped. "This is about the children, too." I replied quietly, "Then think about what they learned from your choices." And I ended the call. My hand didn't shake this time. That night, I sat with Imran on the rooftop. He said, "You're not the same person anymore." I replied, "Good." He looked at me carefully. "Or dangerous?" I said, "Maybe both." He sighed. "Just don't lose yourself in this." I looked at the city lights and said, "I already lost myself once. I'm not afraid of that anymore." The next morning, I received another report. More irregularities. More proof. Daniel was digging his own grave without realizing it. I whispered, "You don't see it yet, but the ground under you is gone." Later that day, my son called again. This time I answered. He said softly, "Dad?" I replied, "Yes." He paused. "Can we talk?" I looked at the files on my desk, then at the phone, and said, "Not yet." He whispered, "Why?" I said quietly, "Because now you need to understand what it feels like to wait." Silence. Then the call ended. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Not revenge, not anger. Balance shifting, slowly, quietly. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. They were starting to feel my absence the same way I once felt theirs. But this time, I wasn't the one chasing. The day Daniel's fraud finally came out, the entire company went silent in a way I had never seen before. I was sitting in my office when the internal alert popped up. Immediate suspension, Daniel R. I leaned back slowly. I whispered, so it finally reached the surface. My assistant rushed in. "Sir, have you seen the news internally?" I said calmly, "I saw it." He hesitated. "They're saying police may get involved." I replied, "They already should be." Within hours, chaos spread through the company. Meetings were canceled. Phones rang nonstop. People who once praised Daniel now avoided even saying his name. I watched it all quietly. No celebration, no reaction, just confirmation. I said softly, "This was never going to stay hidden forever." Sarah called me 6 times that day. I ignored 5 of them. On the 6th, I answered. She didn't greet me. She shouted, "This is your doing, isn't it?" I replied, "No." She said, "Don't lie to me." I stayed calm. I didn't need to. Her voice broke into anger. "Daniel said you've been targeting him from the beginning." I said quietly, "Daniel said a lot of things." She snapped, "You ruined our life." That sentence used to hurt me. This time, it didn't move me at all. I said, "No, your choices did." And I ended the call. 2 days later, my daughter came to my workplace. I didn't expect her. She stood outside my office door, eyes red, hands shaking. She said, "Can I talk to you?" I stepped outside. "What's wrong?" Her voice cracked. "Everything is falling apart." I looked at her for a moment, not as someone winning, but as a father watching distance turn into damage. She asked, "Why is this happening to us?" I said softly, "Some choices have consequences." She shook her head. "But we didn't do anything." I replied, "You believed what you were told." That confused her more. She whispered, "I don't understand you anymore." I said, "You were never allowed to." And that made her cry harder. I didn't stop her. I just stood there quietly while she broke in front of me. Later that evening, Sarah came herself. She didn't call first. She just showed up. She walked into the office like she still had authority in my life. She said, "We need to talk." Alone. I closed the door. She didn't sit. She pointed at me. "You did this." I looked at her. "No." She said, "Daniel is being investigated because of you." I replied, "Because of his actions." Her voice rose. "He said you've been collecting things on him for months." I nodded. "Correct." She froze. "So you admit it?" I said calmly, "I admit I found the truth." Her eyes filled with disbelief. "Why?" I opened my drawer and placed a file on the table. She stared at it. "What is that?" I said, "Proof." She didn't move. I pushed it closer. Bank transfers. Fake contracts. Misused funds. Everything. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page changed her face. For the first time, she had nothing to say. No insult. No blame. No escape. Just silence. I said quietly, "You chose him. I chose truth." She whispered, "You destroyed everything I had left." I replied, "No." I exposed what was already collapsing. She looked at me like she was seeing someone unfamiliar. Maybe she was. When she left, she didn't slam the door. She just walked out slowly, like reality had finally become heavier than her pride. That night, my son called again. I answered. He said softly, "Dad, is it true about Daniel?" I said yes. A long silence followed. Then he asked, "Did you know?" I replied, "Yes." His voice dropped. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at the window and said, "Because you wouldn't have believed me." He didn't answer. After the call, I sat alone for a long time. I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied. Just still. Imran messaged me. "It's getting serious now." I replied, "It was always serious. They just didn't see it." The next morning, news reports started appearing. corporate fraud investigation underway. Daniel's name was everywhere now. The man they trusted, the man they chose, was falling publicly. I whispered to myself, this is what happens when truth finally stops waiting. But somewhere deep inside, I knew something else was happening too. My children were no longer just losing him. They were starting to question everything they believed about me. Months passed quietly, like the world had finally stopped trying to break me. My life wasn't loud anymore. It was structured, calm, real. I traveled between cities for work, rebuilt parts of the company, and most importantly, I saw my children on scheduled visits that slowly became something more natural than painful. At first, they were distant, careful, like they were walking around a version of me they didn't fully recognize. But time does something even truth can't force. It softens understanding. One evening, my daughter came to me after dinner. She stood near the door and said softly, "Can I talk to you?" I replied, "Of course." She hesitated. I didn't understand everything before. I looked at her gently. "You didn't have to understand everything. You were just a child." Her eyes lowered. "I still hurt you." I said quietly, "Yes." A pause. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." That word hit differently now. Not like a wound. Like release. I nodded. "I know." And for the first time, she didn't run away after saying it. She stayed. My son took longer. He didn't apologize in words at first. He started showing up earlier, sitting closer, talking more. And one day he just said, "Dad, can you help me with this?" No hesitation. No confusion. Just, "Dad." I didn't react outwardly, but something inside me settled. Sarah stayed distant. She lived in another part of the city now. We didn't fight anymore. We didn't talk much either. She existed in the background of a past that had already finished speaking, and I didn't chase closure from her, because I already had it. One night, my son and I were sitting on the balcony after dinner. The air was quiet. He asked suddenly, "Dad, will you ever go back to how things were before?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the city lights instead. Then I said no. He frowned slightly. "Why not?" I took a slow breath. "Because that life ended the day you stopped needing me." Silence followed. Heavy. Honest. Then I heard him sniff quietly. "Dad." He didn't finish the sentence. He just leaned into me, and I held him. For a long time, I stayed like that. Not as a man trying to fix the past. Not as someone proving a point. Just a father holding what remained. Later that night, after he slept, I sat alone in the quiet room. I thought about everything. Sarah, Daniel, the company, the silence, the loss, the return. None of it felt like victory anymore. It felt like understanding. Imran messaged me, "You've changed completely." I replied, "No, I just stopped fighting for what was already gone." I looked out the window and whispered to myself, rebirth isn't about revenge. It's about no longer needing to be chosen to know your worth. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I didn't need anyone to complete the story of my life anymore.